Welcome to Life in the Pit, a podcast about the lives and adventures of instrumentalists within the wonderful world of musical theater. And now, here is your host, David Lane.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode number 69. It is great to be with you once again. This is a bit of a strange week for me, and so the episode's going to sound a little bit different. Ordinarily, I like to record my guests in advance, a week or so. Gives me a chance to kind of leisurely edit the material and also promote it. And I usually put out these episodes on a Friday, and more often than not, we'll record the portion of the podcast that I'm doing right now, the introduction, on the day before, on Thursday. Well, everything's kind of out of whack this week, and it's because of the show that I'm going to be talking about with my guest. I am the music director and keyboard 2 player for Into the Woods for a community theater called Lexington Live in Lexington, North Carolina. And this is the first show that this organization has done as an independent theater. And we've got the full pit of 15 pieces. We're only playing for one weekend, and that is tonight, Friday, May 13, Saturday, May 14. Those are 7:30 shows, and then a 2 o'clock show on Sunday, the 15th. And I thought it would be an ideal time to talk to Jeff Saver, who was the music director for basically the second half of the original run of Into the Woods on Broadway. And we talk mostly about that. We don't even cover any of his career beyond that, which is actually quite extensive because he also was a conductor or an assistant conductor for Kiss of the Spider Woman, Chicago, End of the Rainbow, and Allegiance. And he's got a lot of other credits besides that. So as you'll hear at the end of this interview, we've already said he's going to have to come back on. Anyway, Jeff is a very busy guy, and it was hard to find a mutual time that we could get this interview. So we got this, as I'm recording right now, on Tuesday, May 10th. And it starts on a train ride from his perspective of heading into New York City. About the middle of the interview, we're in Grand Central Station, and the second half of the interview, he's walking around streets of New York, and all of that ambiance is there. And I think some podcasts would have maybe a problem with that. You know, it's not studio quality, quote unquote. But I thought this was a nice slice of real life. So the interview, the sound quality is a little uneven. And there's kind of constant background noise, but I think that's so appropriate. And as Jeff himself elaborates, it's nice some of the things that we keep in there, some siren sounds, some other people coming by, because this is real life, and this is a lot of what Into the Woods, the story, is about, as Jeff sees it from his perspective, and so. I think this is a very special episode. I really enjoyed this interview. I think Jeff is a fascinating guy, and I can't wait for you to hear what he has to say. And I think you'll agree with me. It'll be great to have him back on in a future episode. But we're going to chat mostly about Into the Woods and just also a few other little things that he's done local to my area. Also, I am rushing the process a little bit because as soon as I finish editing the show and schedule it for a Friday release, I have to unplug this computer and take it to Lexington because I'm running main stage from this very computer, and it is going to be needed for the rest of the dress rehearsals and our shows. So that is why the schedule, at least in putting this episode together, is off a little bit. Lastly, just want to give a thank you to Fonz for once again sponsoring this episode, and you can click on the link in the show notes to get a free trial. If you have a private studio of any kind, you want to check out what they can do with a 14-day trial. I can tell you they have excellent customer service, excellent people on staff, and are willing to help you get more out of your business with less time. And now, without any further delay, here is my interview with Jeff Saver. I am talking today with Jeff Saver, who is gratefully fitting me in while he is on a train at the moment. So you have been a very busy guy recently, but it sounds like you're always busy. So thank you for joining me today, Jeff.
Well, sure, my pleasure. It seems to be anytime I have seemingly some downtime, it gets taken away from me. But no complaints there. It's all been good work.
Right. Just to be grateful of your time. There's a lot of things that we could talk about, but there's really two things I thought specifically would be great to focus on, just based on some things that I've heard about your experience. So I am on Tech Week of Into the Woods for a local theater called Lexington Live. And I know I believe that was your first Broadway show. And
actually not my first Broadway show, but it was the first show I got to conduct for Steve Sondheim and James Lapine. Correct. Yeah, I had worked with them by fortuitous accident, as most of my jobs were.
Right.
First on a show they wrote a couple of years earlier called Sunday in the Park with George. I was kind of an interesting story that I won't bore you with, but through sheer accidents and circumstances, I was the extra rehearsal pianist on that show because they needed extra people so they could have extra orchestra rehearsals because Mr. Sondheim was working with a new orchestrator at the time named Michael Starobin, who of course is now an established Tony Award winning orchestrator, but that was his first Broadway show,
Right.
So, and Into the Woods, I joined not even a year later after the show only ran like less than 2 years. It's funny because it's iconic today, but it was not a commercial hit.
Right.
But I joined maybe about 8 or 9 months after the show opened, and then took over the show soon after, which was not planned at all either, but it was a great honor and a great show, as you know. Have so much fun with it, David.
Right. Well, I want to dig a little bit. So my podcast is it's about people in musical theater who are musicians, and a lot of involves that interests people is how people got started. So you said it was a long story you didn't want to bore me with, but maybe what's a shortened version of how did you get to meeting Sondheim and James Lapine, and like how did you get into this line of work?
Well, I think everyone has a different story about how they got, working in the theater or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But as a musician, I played a lot of styles of music. I graduated from CCM, Cincinnati Conservatory.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry about all the noise.
Oh, that's fine. But, we're live on location.
Okay, great. And there's other people talking on here, but I hope you can hear me okay.
You're fine.
Yeah. I had I got a tour, and that's another. I literally got a tour. I took my girlfriend at the time to see a tour of Bob Fosse's Dancing. And as a musician, what I do, I sauntered down to the pit during the intermission and met a couple of musicians, and one thing led to another. I ended up joining that tour, and I toured for a year. That was before I even moved to New York. And Bob Fosse's Dancing is a very eclectic show. So you have everything from classical music to straight ahead jazz, like Benny Goodman's Sing Sing Sing, to just the kitchen sink.
Right.
Because Fosse loved to work with a lot of different styles, and then moved to New York, and I was music directing an off-Broadway show called The Fantastics. It was at the time the longest running show in the world, second only to The Mousetrap in London, the play. And I got a call from a fantastic pianist named Tom Fay. He used to tour with Jerry Mulligan's band. And Tom could barely speak. He was like, Jeff. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning, and he had like 105 fever, and he needed a sub for a show that he was doing. It was a John Kander, Fred Ebb show called The Rink that starred Cheetah Rivera and Liza Minnelli, and a lot of other unknown people on there, like Jason Alexander, who became famous later on Seinfeld, but he was in that show. And he was sick, and he needed somebody to sub. So, I mean, he asked me to sight read the show, and I would never do that today, David, because I was young and stupid then, you know.
Right.
But I felt bad for him because he was ill, and so I went down there. By the way, we're going underground, so I hope I don't lose you. But if I do, I'll hop right back on. Okay.
Oh, that's fine.
Anyways, I got a sub for myself. I got down to the theater. It's the Hirschfeld Theater, but it was called the Martin Beck at the time. And I started looking at the music frantically as much as I could. It was pretty involved, and the pit was great. So I started playing. I didn't really know who the conductor was, and I just kind of was looking when I could, but I was pretty glued to the page, as you can imagine. And at intermission, I'm talking to this sax player. He came up to me, he was talking to me. His name's Lawrence Feldman. We became friends, but then I didn't know anybody. And I was pretty nervous. And I said, am I doing okay? And he said, yeah, I'm talking to you. And that was a learning curve. Like, you know, if it wasn't going well, probably nobody would be talking to you because they wouldn't be seeing you, you know.
Right.
So I said, wow, this is pretty hardcore down here.
Yeah.
So I got through the show somehow. Don't ask me what happened. I don't remember. It was an out-of-body experience, and I'm sure I probably had an adult beverage afterwards to calm myself. And the very next day, I got a call from a friend of mine named Ted Sperling, who said, hey, Jeff, we need another rehearsal pianist for this new show I'm doing of Sondheim. And he's working with a new orchestrator, and he's a little nervous, and because he had only worked with Jonathan Tunick during the 70s primarily, and all the way through like Sweeney Todd, Company, you know,
right.
Merrily We Roll Along. And then he was working with Michael Starobin on this, so asked me if I would do that, and I said, yeah, I'd love to. I'm doing the Fantastics in the evening, but I could work with you guys in the daytime. And then I said, why me? There's a million piano players in town. And he said, well, did you play the Rink yesterday? And I said, yeah, how did you know? And I said, well, Paul Gemignani was the conductor, and he conducts most of Steve Sondheim's shows. And he said, try to get that guy. So I guess I did okay, and that led into that. And isn't that crazy, David? You know?
Yeah.
So talk about a weird circumstance, because somebody got sick, and because I did, I guess, decently enough, I fooled them again, you know.
Well, I've come to discover it's a very common story. I know very few people that woke up one day and said, I'm going to be in this show. I'm going to talk this person and get there. It's always bailing someone out, or somebody connected to somebody connected heard you, and you did a good job at that time, and that got you a second look. And it's always those stories. And
you know what it is? It's really, you train, you work hard, and then when opportunities present themselves, you hope you're as prepared as possible, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we're just a few months removed from, well, I guess it's coming up on about a half year that we lost Stephen Sondheim. And my understanding is that you knew him outside of rehearsals, that you had a friendship with him. And just tell us just a little bit about Stephen Sondheim from your experience.
Well, first of all, it's a great loss, obviously. For all of us, for the whole theater community. But, you know, I actually, David, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I spoke to him just about 6 weeks before he passed. I was in Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
Doing others. And I had done a coaching, and I'd been working on some various material and some of Steve's work. And I was just thinking, how's I wonder how he's doing,
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave him a call, and he picked up, and he was in a great mood. He was happy that, West Side had just opened and the films and company was being revived, and he was working on something new, and he was excited about that. He was in a great mood. And he says, listen, I don't come into the city much because of COVID, but, please call me when you get in. Maybe we'll have dinner.
Yeah.
And so his passing was never mind the icon that he was, when you just talk to somebody and they're suddenly not there, it's so jarring and so upsetting. So
Yeah.
part of me is still in denial that he's not here, but his music is here and his work is here. And David, that we lived in his time.
Yeah.
I think the loss, and I don't think I'm exaggerating because I'm talking to other theater people.
Yeah.
And I thought, after a while I started thinking, this is what must have felt like when people who were alive when Shakespeare was or when Beethoven was in their time. This is what this must have felt, because he was truly a titan. And they don't come along every generation. They really don't. They come very seldom, and he was that for theater. I mean, he was so experimental. He was never wanted to bore himself by doing the same thing, always tried new things. And, even a financial failure by Sondheim was an incredible artistic experience for everybody, and usually shows that people catch up with, I mean, look at Into the Woods. It's become a show like everybody does. And we didn't run 2 years, and the show never paid back. So it was considered a financial flop.
Right.
Which is ironic because I used to get faxes from him that said House of Hits. So that shows you his humor right there.
Right. It also occurs to me it might be the end of an era because, I think, Sondheim was one of several people of his generation who would write very harmonically daring shows, a lot of clusters, a lot of very dissonant chords, and rhythmically complex.
His influences were classically trained.
Right. I'm not sure how many people could present a show that has the harmonic language of his now that would get a look from, a serious producer. It's like there's a few like Adam Gettle, I know, but it seems like producers like to play it more safe now, with the material if it's going to go on Broadway. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Is that your perspective? Are we in a trend change?
Forgive me.
Sure.
As I'm talking to you, I'm sort of packing up because the train's pulling into Grand Central right now.
Right.
I think that theater has always been risky.
Right.
Everything is, you say compared to what?
Right.
And you have to remember that the economics was different, but it's a business. They call it show business.
Yeah.
And nobody does it to not make a buck too. Because the thing is, even in film, if you do a film, you used to make it back in DVD sales or streaming or something, you could get some revenue. But you put that many today, $1 million up, and it never comes back,
Right.
So it's a huge investment. And that's why people say you got to be crazy. You can make a killing, but you can't make a living.
Right.
But I've sort of done the opposite. I haven't made a killing, but I've made a living.
Right.
Forgive me as I'm getting off here.
Oh, no problem.
But I will say that today, David, it's more risky because shows used to try out out of town.
Mm-hmm.
Like, take the era of, really up through the 60s, even into well into the 80s. A show would try out of town. So take a show like Oklahoma. Oklahoma played 3 or 4 cities before it came into New York. Nobody was like hearing about the show or hearing much about the show. Like Oklahoma used to be called Away We Go. That was the name of the show.
Yeah.
The song Oklahoma didn't go in until the last second.
Right.
And then things changed. So, and that's what shows do.
Yeah.
People, they'll do like Into the Woods or Camelot. You don't see the You don't know the song Boom Crunch? That was an Into the Woods. That got cut. There's an extension of Any Moment. That got cut. You know, they're just pruning and pruning.
Yep.
And things are cut and things are added. And you're literally making, you know, you can say a work of art, but you're making something new. Then you put it in front of audiences. And that's the other really important piece of information. Because you think it's okay, but the audience always tells you the truth.
Yep.
They'll tell you what, and that's very important in any writer. John Kander said on his first show, this was the show before Cabaret, Flora the Red Menace, George Abbott was the director.
Yeah.
And he said, first preview, who's going to sit with me?
Yeah.
And then he sits down in the audience. John sat with him and he said, this is where you're going to learn. And he's right. And that's what the audience will tell you what's working, what's not working. But it's risky because it's more expensive now. I mean, a show like Wicked, that's a huge production.
Yeah.
And I think in its time, it cost like between $10 and $12 million. Today, it'll be over 20.
Yeah.
And let me remind you that Wicked didn't get great reviews.
Right.
But still was able to garner an audience, I think mostly of young teenage girls at the time.
Right.
And I mean, it's still not only running, but it's a big hit. Going to try to get to a quiet place out here if that's possible.
Oh, it's fine. It's nice seeing the city in the background. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, my town. It's nice to be back.
I haven't been there since 2018, I think. So it's great.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love it here. Yeah.
I was going to say another thing about Stephen Sondheim that I've heard, and I think it was made abundantly clear in the Tick Tick Boom, you know, film on Netflix, is that he was very
one about Jonathan Larson.
Yeah, he was very generous with young artists. You know,
oh my God. Yeah, so much. You know, I have to say, Steve and his generation, Sheldon Harnick, Jerry Bach, John Kander, Fred Ebb, that whole generation, you know, they all felt so fortunate to do what they do.
Yeah.
And why not pay it forward? They're all, every one of them. And Steve particularly he was not only great at the things we know him to be great, but actors loved him, musicians loved him because he gave the best notes. He was like a great teacher.
Yeah.
He was like Lenny Bernstein, couldn't help but teach.
Right.
You know, everything was sharing.
Yep.
And Steve was so articulate that, you know, there was no guessing. You knew exactly what he wanted. And if you didn't, you just asked. He was so wonderful that way. But for writers, you know, the only time he wouldn't listen to something is if he was writing himself.
Right.
Because he would be afraid that he would steal.
Right.
And he told everyone that. He told Jonathan, he told me, you know, any writer. But aside from that, he would absolutely check things out. He would listen to things and give you his honest appraisal, just like his teacher did, which was Oscar Hammerstein. I'm sure you must know.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, he was all of that, like you saw in Tick Tick Boom. Very true. Very generous, and would do anything to help young people. Also, he knew how difficult it was. You know, he just thought none of his stuff would get on today. Nobody would take a chance on his stuff. But he's a big piece of advice he gave all writers, and that is try to get your work seen.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
Right.
Even if it's in a basement or a church or anywhere, just make sure you do whatever you can to get your work seen.
Right.
Very important.
Yeah.
So I had to pass that on to you for other people that might be writing.
Right.
Because quite frankly, teaching is my passion too.
Yes.
And it's just paying it forward, you know, because there will be somebody that will take a chance on you.
Yeah,
it will happen.
I was trying to look up and see if I remember this correctly. I think I think it was Stephen Sondheim. One of his teachers was Milton Babbitt. And I don't remember if I was correct.
For a minute, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I always found that funny because the guy who's most famous in history for writing an article that says, "Who cares if you listen?" One of his most famous students is someone who really cared if you listen.
Well, you know what? Take everything. You must know this as an artist yourself.
Yeah. Take
everything with a grain of salt, because I'm sure Milton may have written it and said it, but guess what? He changed his mind.
Right.
He certainly did. And, Milton was, Babbitt was one of Steve's many influences, but he also said that Babbitt was a frustrated songwriter too. And he wanted to write a show. So I think he did care.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
That's true. Any special memories of your time on Into the Woods? Just being on that first run, any special moments that stand out when you think back?
Yeah, so many actually. But it's interesting that we're talking about Into the Woods, because I just got back in town yesterday from a tour in the Midwest. Actually, we were in Texas and Oklahoma, and sorry about all the noise out there. I don't know if you can hear it, but we were in St. Louis, and I guess about 3 hours away is Springfield, Missouri, and two of my friends that I hadn't been in touch with in a while, I got back in touch with Bob Westenberg and Kim Crosby, and Bob was the original Cinderella's Prince and the Wolf.
Yeah.
And I had also worked with Bob on two other shows. I'd worked with him on Sunday in the Park, and also a wonderful show I loved conducting called The Secret Garden.
Yeah.
He was on. And Bob is teaching at a college there, and his wife is Kim Crosby, and she was the original Cinderella. They met on the show.
Yeah.
And they actually fell in love. And, they were having babies up in Washington Heights while I was just courting my late wife, Memby, at the time. And so we were great friends. And they're just wonderful, wonderful people. But they were great. I mean, I remember Kim, she had the best fall. She has to take that pratfall.
Oh, yeah.
And I would just marvel how she did it and didn't break her neck. I mean, she wouldn't hold back, She just could fall so brilliantly. I know that's an odd thing to say.
Right.
It's like, what's the great acting moment? Oh, your fall, baby. It's like.
Well, this has been one of those shows where I have been in a lot of the blocking sessions. So I was there when our director worked with our Cinderella on how to fall, and
yes,
with
exactly.
slow motion. So it's yeah. So I completely understand. Yeah.
But in terms of specific memories. I'll tell you a funny thing that happened. The pit at the Martin Beck, it has kind of a lip. It was unusual. We had behind us what's called a passerelle, at least on our production.
Yeah.
And a passerelle is basically a sort of little runway that came right behind the orchestra pit that the actors could come out on. For example, Little Red would have this experience, with the wolf, and she comes out and sings "I Know Things Now." And she came out on the passerelle and sang it. And several of the characters did that. And of course they do on the end of the first act. I remember having the witch. I'd have Bernadette behind me and Kay McClellan and Lauren Mitchell.
Yeah.
And they'd have their walking sticks. And sometimes I would pull on the stick, which you shouldn't have your conductor do probably, but
right.
Messing around, and Bernadette would kick me or something,
Mm-hmm.
So those were little fun things I remember. But they were just so professional, so fun, and really, really lovely. But I'll tell you, one of the actors I've worked with that I learned so much from, and we all did, was may he rest in peace, Tom Aldridge.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom was our original narrator and Mysterious Man.
Yeah.
And he's not really known as a singer, but he's a great actor, and his sense of timing. We all loved him and we respected him. And I just learned how to breathe with actors from him, his pacing and the way he would do. It's hard for me to describe it.
Yeah.
But when I moved to the city, I was also playing classes for Uta Hagen. Now and then she would add music, and I didn't really know who she was at the time.
Right.
So my ignorance was bliss, but I learned a lot. And Tom taught us a lot. And of course, incredible Joanna Gleason, who played the baker's wife. I mean, she was born to play that role. Yeah. And everyone copied things that she did because they worked, because they were so good. She was so natural with it, so real. You want that as an actor, almost more than the musical values. You're going to get the musical values, but you cannot separate the music from the lyric, from the story, from the character. And with Steve and with Sheldon and with Tanner and Ed, all these people, character comes first.
Yeah. And
what are the needs of your character and how are we going to get there? So sometimes I would hear an actor say 2 words and I was, they're struggling today, or they've got a cold, and I've got a sub clarinetist in today, but she doesn't know that. And you have to make it work that day for that audience, Yeah. You know what? I'll share one story with you that I actually share with my students, David, because it was such a learning curve. I have to say that, when you're doing a show, usually in the community or school, you're lucky to get 1 or 2 weekends, and that's it.
Right.
But when you're doing a show 8 times a week, you're a human being. And sometimes people can get a little bit lazy or go on automatic pilot. It's challenging to keep it fresh.
Yeah. And
so it's hard to describe, but as a conductor, you can feel your audience. Each show is different and you can breathe with them. The way laughs land or don't land, the way a scene lands, it's a different animal. Rosalind Hammerstein wrote a song called The Big Black Giant from, what's the show? Me and Juliet, not a hit show, but it was talking about the audience and how that big black giant changes every day, so
right.
True. But with the Passerelle, it distanced me a little bit, and I almost never saw the audience. Obviously, I'm facing my musicians and facing my cast and my people. But I was doing the scene in the second act. I always look at it as a scene, the no one is alone thing, because I remember very specifically Steve saying to Chip Zion and Kim Crosby, our Baker and Cinderella, that you have one job: help the young people. They're hurting. Be a parent. Help the young people. Be present. And she has to, because I think Little Red has that first, mother or grandmother, somebody would feel bad about these circumstances or something, because of the way she speaks, but she's hurting. And her first lyric, it could have been dialogue. Mother isn't here now. Now you're on your own, but you're not alone. I'm here with you. I'm present with you. I will take care. I will not leave you. And the acknowledgement that all of us make mistakes. So I'm conducting, and I've got this beautiful chamber orchestra, great musicians.
Yeah.
I mean, that it was an honor. You don't conduct them. You work with them, you collaborate with them. It was, we just make music together. We all breathe together. And it was such an honor for me to be with those great people. But I'm doing this, and I spy this little girl and her mother in the front row, just accidentally. And I see a little tear. Yeah. Sorry. All these years later. Yeah. And I get choked up. And I thought, I'm holding this little piece of wood. I do this 8 times a week, but we have such a responsibility to be present every moment, because there's going to be somebody out there that doesn't know this piece, doesn't know what, I don't care what piece you're doing. You think, oh, everybody knows this or whatever. Not true. You have to do everything. I don't care if you're doing a Woody Herman chart or a Thad Jones chart or you're doing Mahler 7, or you think everybody knows. No, you're presenting. It's a new piece of work. new, living, breathing piece of work every moment. And I remember talking to them after the show. I'm thinking, I'm holding this piece of wood, but we have such a great responsibility in doing what we do.
Yeah.
It's a responsibility and an opportunity to share this incredible work. I mean, God, what an honor to be alive, to do what we love to do. And I remember talking to her and her mother after, and she was like 12 or something. And I said, did you like the first act better or the second act? Because they usually like the first act,
right.
And everything ends up nicely and all wrapped up in a bow. And she surprised me and she said, I like the second act better. And I said, whoa.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And she says, because it was real.
Yeah.
It's the truth. And I thought, I think I said something like, Mom, you saved your kid like a lot of, butts in therapy or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just not the answer you expected,
I saw this show live twice, and also I saw the video with, on the PBS, I've seen that before. And every time I like the first act better, but now that I'm doing the show as a music director, I like the second act better. And it's, I'm in my 40s now, and I think that makes a difference, just...
I just look at it as one big line. I don't conduct songs. I conduct acts.
Yeah.
I conduct, the entire line of the thing. Because, I got to say, even as a kid, when, my mom was reading me a stories and they live happily ever after, right? That's what the stories do. They say, well, I always wondered what happened to this guy and what happened to this, character. And I always wondered, and I love the idea that Stephen James took that idea of, well, this is what happened ever after. Mm-hmm. And real life things happen, people get dismayed and they get, people, bad circumstances happen and there's death and there's, people have affairs and humans are imperfect. And what do you do when those things happen? It's ironic how pieces like Into the Woods still have the resonance, with, the royal family at the time was the politics of the day. And we were in the middle of an AIDS crisis. Yeah. And it was awful. And the government was looking the other way. They looked the other way until Rock Hudson got sick. And they tend to look the other way. And our responsibility is to not look the other way and to take care of I think that's one of the big messages of Into the Woods is community responsibility, that we are responsible for one another. And that is something that, the New York scene, it's a very small, tight scene. And when things like that happen, when the AIDS crisis happened, when I conducted a big concert shortly after the Sandy Hook tragedy. Yeah, it was an all-star event. In fact, we did Sunday with the Newtown High School, and Steve and Michael let me have they were singing that song, and we got all our orchestrations for free. Had a huge choir. Michael Cerberus did it. He had done it. We had Brian Stokes Mitchell and Christine. But people show up. Yeah, they show up for one another, and that's Into the Woods, And it's about parents and children.
Right. I guess one last question about Into the Woods is I'm conducting it with a 15-piece pit. I was wondering, is that the same thing that you had, or has it changed for
It sounds very similar. I mean, it was very unusual and wonderfully so in that the three Reed books don't have a lot of doubles, and that's very uncommon on Broadway. Right. I assume it's still like, just one double, flute piccolo, but then it was clarinet and bassoon. Great players. Yeah. So it was really like a chamber orchestration, 2 French horns, 1 trumpet, 1 very exposed trumpet, Yep. A little bigger than a string quartet. We had 2 violas and, with a lot of shimmer effects, especially in things like Steps of the Palace. And
well, that sounds identical.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have, piano and a synth for, effects.
Yeah. Now I am doubling. I'm conducting and playing the synth and for the most part, kind of modifying it so I can play it with one hand. But there's a few places where I got to get 2 hands on. And it's kind of funny.
Do you do the cow gulps in there?
Yep.
In the first act?
Yeah, we have a wonderful sound designer that found a great swallow gulp sound and goes in there. And I found the baby crying, a squish sound.
For the second act.
Yeah.
It's delightful orchestration, isn't it?
Yeah, but she also gave me some footsteps so that she can overlay like some, shrubs being destroyed and things. So it's very fun.
So you do all that? Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
I didn't have to do that.
Now it's kind of funny. The keyboard one is tacit on Agony and Agony Reprise, and I had this two-handed harp stuff.
Oh, really?
So we finally said, hey, why don't you take the harp part? And so he's inserted that, so I don't have to play that one
because the strings are going bum 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 bum. The barcarolle.
Yeah.
Honestly, the piano did play there, but he played very softly.
Oh, okay.
So I'm sure Tunick is fine. Just Jonathan Tunick's orchestration. I'm sure he's just fine with it being,
right.
Like a string ensemble. But that sure, and we didn't use a real harp on that, unfortunately.
Right.
I forget why, but we did on Sunday in the Park with George. We had a real harpist, and it was so great.
Right.
But no, it's great. You're going to have a ball.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. We add the orchestra to the last two dress rehearsals starting tomorrow, actually, as of this interview. And we've done one rehearsal. We've done a sitz probe. Now, so one more thing I want to chat with you about is, as we mentioned before we started recording, you've come to my area a few times to Winston-Salem, and you've conducted at North Carolina School of the Arts, and you've done Next to Normal, and you've done Heathers. And I was suggested to contact you because we know a lot of the same musicians. In fact, Taiki Azuma was in Heathers. He's my flute player for Into the Woods.
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
He's so great. Yeah, tell him to have so much fun. Who else you got on there? Do you have? We had what's his name? The violinist. I wonder if he's.
Yeah, Charlie Schaefer was slated to come on, but a months in advance. But then he had something come up a couple of months ago, and I had to go with someone else.
Tell Charlie he's missing out on a great show.
Oh yeah, I think he got to play in Elon at Elon University, which is another place nearby, a few months ago. So there's a lot of people doing it this year. One of my very first guests on this podcast is a mutual friend of ours, Alan Beck, who played guitar.
Oh.
And he was the one who told me I should talk to you. And Alan told me something. So I did not get to see Heathers, but he told me, and I think Taiki agreed, that of all the pits that he's played, and it's been about 30 years, he thought that the pit for Heathers might have been the best pit experience overall he's ever had. And I think he said it wasn't just the quality of players, because we've had a lot of pits with quality players, but he credited your energy and your personality. And
listen, that's very kind of them, but you know this, Dave. You're only as good as the players that are surrounding you.
Yeah. And
I was honored to work with those guys. Those guys are like top of the line. Alan he's just a monster player. You know, I mean, he just and he does his work. And so, I'll tell you something I learned actually. I don't know, probably didn't mention this to you, but I was very honored to work with, when I was doing Into the Woods, I met Lenny Bernstein. I was working on a thing for his 70th birthday at the time, Tanglewood, and we became friends, and I started studying with him. And obviously that was a great experience, but I was doing this thing he had asked me to do at Juilliard. I guess they lost, a student was supposed to prepare Appalachian Spring. And Bernstein calls me in the morning, Sunday morning, I'll never forget. And it was like, don't you know I'm a musician? Who's up on a Sunday morning,
Yeah.
And he said, do you know Appalachian Spring? And I said, I do. He goes, can you fill in today? We lost the guy. And I said, well, why don't you do it? You know it. I literally said that to him. And he goes, yeah, I can't. I have to sort of moderate a little bit. So sorry about the siren in the background.
That's fine.
And so I'm getting up there, and I was a young conductor. The ambulance is just going by now. Hope they're okay. Anyways, conducting away, and the orchestra's playing great, and I'm like cueing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also shot out of a cannon because I hadn't really. I knew the piece, but I'd never conducted it before, and so I was just reacting. And as I'm conducting, Lenny taps me on the shoulder, and he whispers in my ear, "Do you like the way they're playing?" And I thought that was a really odd thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, whatever I'm doing. And I said, "Yeah, I like the way, yeah." And he said, "Then let them play." And I think what he meant was he gave me the trust in myself to let me do what I do, to feel, and that I didn't have to micromanage and give every single cue. They know it. Just make music.
Yeah.
Just make music. And part of making music is letting the musicians do what they do, letting your actors do what they do. And that was maybe the greatest lesson he could have given me,
right.
That this is a collaboration. It's like when you're playing chamber music or playing in a jazz trio. Like I was just touring with this fantastic group of women from Nairobi, Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so much fun. And we were playing this room in St. Louis, and I had a great bass player, a great drummer, and these three crazy ladies that are just fantastic. And I just continue to learn by listening to them. We were just having such a great time. And that's what you do. You all listen together, you all work together. And it's such an honor to do what we do.
Yeah.
If it's not fun, what's the point?
Right.
I had a musician friend that was like, "No, man, it's when something's too hard," he goes, "Life's too long."
Right.
That was the great Wally Harper, who used to accompany Barbara Cook, and I always quote him: "Life's too long." You got to enjoy yourselves.
I've always wondered when you work with great musicians, they're still expecting some critique. What are like some common things that you're listening for to help them take their very good to great?
Well, obviously, intonation is important. Making sure that everybody gets a good A, and that you really tune correctly. That these are just basic things. Of course, you would do this in any community orchestra or anything. Just everybody listening, listen.
Yep.
Listen to each other. Like I remember having a sub on a viola book, and she was like glued to her page, and I said, "Hey, you got to listen. And you got to watch for my upbeat here because I have to breathe with them. And you think it's going to be the same, and it's not.
Yeah.
Give me a little flexibility here because I need to see where my actor is emotionally. It may be different." So making sure that my players are present and ready for anything. And if there's like each show is different.
Yeah.
Each concert is different. Everything changes up. So making sure that people have the information that they need.
Right.
And that's my job, because by and large, the players and the actors around you, they want it to be wonderful too.
Yeah.
So it's your job to help them. And it like, you get those conductors that like somebody makes a mistake and they glare them down. That doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
After maybe 3 of the same mistakes, I would go up to the player and say, "Let's look at this part." And sometimes you say, "Oh, the part wasn't." Sorry,
that's fine.
New York person. Yeah. See, I won't be giving him notes today. So.
That's fine. we might cut that part out.
Or not,
we'll
it's like part of New York life.
Yeah, it's true.
But you know what it is? Maybe that's a good thing to have happened, because things happen.
Yeah.
That's like uncomfortable things happening into the woods too.
Yeah, we'll leave that out.
And I'm thinking, how are you going to deal with that? You know, somebody would confront that. And there are some personalities that get very defensive and kind of figure out which battles are important. But also remembering that it's a show or a concert, and it's important. I take the work seriously, but I don't think I take myself very seriously.
Right.
In other words, if we make a mistake, it's a mistake. But it's not like you don't want to hear a surgeon or a pilot say, oops,
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
So it's a little bit different, you know? It's like, let's be real here, you know?
That's a great
It's like,
perspective.
let's just do it again, you know? So I think perspective is important. And maybe I've learned some of that as I've accumulated years, you know?
Right.
But to have a good time and make sure your players, you know, when you get in a pit space or something, make sure your players can hear, they can see, they're comfortable. Otherwise, they can't do what they do. Make sure your actors are comfortable. If it's a dance show and they're in a costume that's not fitting right, they're not going to be able to do their best work, you know. And I'm really collaborative with my sound department because they can take all of your work and undo it.
Right.
They need to know the show better than we do.
Yeah.
They need to know who's coming in where. I make sure I go through with my sound people the whole show, both with actors and orchestrally. You can ask the sound folks or the students, because they have student designers at the North Carolina School of the Arts. And I took my sound person out to lunch and we went right through everything. And, you know, I think those things are really important, you know, to make sure we're all on the same page, to tell the same story.
Yeah.
And we're collaborating. It's a collaborative art. It's not me and the piano and Chopin.
Yeah.
You know, no, it's a lot of people in the room and every one of them is important.
Yeah.
And that's something I learned from Chita Rivera, actually. You know, she would just go after anybody that wasn't being treated well. I don't care if you were handing out programs. Everybody in the room is not just, you don't use just this or just that.
Yeah.
And I never let, you know, if I'm teaching, my only dirty word is can't.
Yep.
My actors or musicians, I can't. No, don't use that word, because you will, and we'll find a way.
Yeah.
That we'll get there. We'll discover. And whatever you've learned as a teacher, the students keep teaching you. That's Hammerstein that said in King and I, by your pupils you'll be taught. And that's so true, because if you pay attention, it's like children. Like I have 2 girls and they continue to teach me what's important. And if you listen carefully, you can't use the same stock ways. You have to be creative and find a way to get people to understand and take the time. If it's not like a one-nighter and you have time, especially as a teacher, to take the time with your people to make sure they have what they need.
Right.
And then anything's possible. And isn't that the best?
Well, I think you've revealed why, you know, just through your comments, why people, why pit musicians and actors love working with you. So thank you for those reflections. We just have a few minutes left, and I just want to just say, for the benefit of the listeners, we haven't really even touched most of your career. You've had a lot of other Broadway shows. I was looking at, you know, Allegiance, you know, Into the Rainbow, Chicago, Kiss of the. So I may have to get a rain check to have you come back on as a part 2 sometime down the road.
Yeah. And that'll have to be a part 2, because those shows that you named are all pivotal. You know, Allegiance, we ran 4 months, but we all bonded on that show and we miss each other. And Kiss of the Spider Woman was one of the greatest theatrical experiences of my life, you know. So A Secret Garden, it's just an honor to do these things. You know, I was so lucky.
Right.
So happy to do that with you, David.
All right. Well, I'll have, so down the road, we'll get you back on. And also, I guess, is there any place that people can either find out more about you or follow what you're doing?
Email me, give me a call.
Sure.
You know, I'll get you, you know, we have these resumes and stuff like that, but they're just pieces of paper.
Right.
They like list your credits, but they don't tell you anything like the stuff we're talking about. Right. That's more interesting. So, you know, I guess people are interested in those things, but I'm pretty shy about that stuff, ironically. I mean, it was an honor for me, but, you know, there's a lot of great musicians in town. And the fact that I got to be in the room, it was my good fortune. You know, I was the lucky one in the room.
Well,
I got to learn.
Do you have any projects going on now that you can share?
I think it's public knowledge now. I'm doing a benefit in the fall with an old classmate of mine, Steve Flaherty, who people probably know from, you know, his collaboration with Lynn Ahrens. I music directed their very first show, Lucky Stiff, here at Playwrights Horizon. And but we went to college together. We're honoring Steve at my alma mater at CCM.
Yeah.
And it's going to be using their orchestra and a lot of the students at CCM and some named people as well that have, like Christy Altamare played Anastasia. She's a CCM grad, and I'm going to do some things from that, and Ragtime and Susical, and their new musical Knoxville that they've just written in Sarasota. They're just premiering, so we might do something from that. But we're going to honor him in the fall, and I'm really excited about that. I try to do a lot of outreach work with the Sandy Hook Newtown community.
Yeah.
It didn't work out this summer due to COVID and other scheduling things, but we've done a lot. And I believe in that, putting back into the community, you know, especially a community that suffered so much, because we naively thought, oh, that kind of gun violence won't happen again at the time because it was so awful. And boy, were we wrong.
Right.
So it's, you know, they haven't healed. You know, how do you do that when you lose a kid?
Right.
So, and teachers, and so it's into the woods. It's our community responsibility. I believe in that. So, yeah, I'm excited about everything I do. I don't care if it's a big orchestra thing or working with kids in the community.
Yeah.
It all counts. It's all incredible to do. So.
Yeah.
I love teaching. You know, anytime, like when Scott Ziegler has called me to do something, I say yes first before I even know what the show is. I didn't know he was doing Heathers. And I said, are you crazy? This thing is really hard. I don't think he knew how hard it was. You know, it's really hard. I mean, it's challenging for the players, but really hard for students, you know?
Right.
That thing is like, there's the moment and it feels like City on Fire from Sweeney Todd, you know?
Yeah.
That was another great experience. I got to conduct that at Paper Mill Playhouse with George Hearn, who had done it on Broadway, and Judy Kay. It was a great production. And the conductor, by the way, does all those factory whistles.
Yeah. Nice.
You know, City on Fire. Steve actually scored where they were in the score.
Nice.
That's how specific as it was. Yeah.
Nice.
But no, it's I don't have a website. I should, you know, but I'm the worst at self-promotion. I just, you know.
Well,
so
sounds like you're staying busy regardless. So.
You know, John Kander always says, someday they're going to find me out. Fool them again. You know? I feel the same way.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and just, we're just going to close here. I know we could keep talking, but Jeff, thank you for taking time, and I hope you have a great day and rest of your week.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled for you guys. Have so much fun doing that great work. What a great opportunity for players and especially for your audiences, you know.
Right.
Have so much fun. Okay, David?
All right. Thank you. And that wraps up episode number 69. Should have episode 70 coming out in exactly 2 weeks on May 27th. And I'll be sharing more about that in about a week. As a reminder, if you want to follow what's coming up next, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Life in the Pit Pod. You can follow me on Instagram at David Lane Music or on Twitter or Facebook at David M. Lane Music. As always, a special thank you to Mark Parolo for his cover art and to Bill Cisna for providing the introduction to this podcast. The theme music is composed and performed by David Lane. You can find out more about this podcast, leave feedback, or even leave a donation at lifeinthepitpod.com. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and please share with your friends. Thank you for listening.